Most purpose-driven women skip the book of Exodus when it comes to studying because it feels complicated, right? You have the plagues, the laws, tabernacle, ain't nobody asking about. But here's the thing nobody tells you, okay? Exodus is the blueprint for how God delivers people. And if you don't understand this book, then you will misread the rest of, you'll misread almost everything that comes after it in your Bible, and that includes the New Testament. Okay. Welcome to Bible Study for Women, a She Knows the Word podcast hosted by me, Courage Molina. I'm a Bible literacy advocate, a certified biblical life coach, and a seminary student. This podcast exists to help you understand Scripture clearly, consistently, and in a way where you can apply it to your actual life. If you want to read the Bible, but sometimes you feel confused, overwhelmed, bored, or unsure how to apply what you're reading, you are not alone. You are in the right place. Let's get into it. All right. So today we are kicking off our study of the book of Exodus. And we're going to start with the full overview of Exodus. I'm telling you right now, do not skip this episode, okay? Because context matters. Context is everything. If you don't know who wrote the book and why it was written and what's happening in it, you will miss what God is actually saying. And that's the whole reason we're in the Word, because we want to hear what God has to say, right? And so before you start any book of the Bible, before you start reading it, before you start studying it, the first question you want to ask is, who wrote this and what do I need to know about them? All right. Because the author's life, the author's calling and perspective shapes everything in that book, right? It gives you the point of view that the author is coming from. And so for the book that we're about to start, Exodus, who wrote this book? It is widely accepted that Moses is the writer of Exodus. It's accepted by Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike. So we pretty much got that the author is Moses. Now, what do we know about Moses? Well, we know that he was born during genocide, right? This was at a time where Pharaoh ordered all of the Hebrew male babies to be thrown into the Nile. We know that Moses was Hebrew by birth, but he got an Egyptian education because he was raised by Pharaoh's daughter. He lived for 40 years in the palace as a prince. Just think about the education, the experience, and the exposure that he had that way, right? And so after about 40 years growing up in the palace, he ends up killing an Egyptian slave driver, and he fled for his life to Midian, right? He spends 40 years in Midian as a fugitive, and this is where he met his wife Zipporah. They had two sons, and he worked for his father-in-law, Jethro. This is also the place where he encountered God at the burning bush. This is where God reveals to him his name, Yahweh. And so, what I want you to understand is that this is Moses, right? He was kind of raised in this unusual circumstance. He became a murderer, and a fugitive. And this is still the one that God revealed himself to, right? And so, Moses is called, sent, and commissioned to deliver Israel from their oppression in Egypt, right? And in the beginning, when God calls him, he makes a lot of excuses. And so God sends his brother Aaron with him. He plays a lot of roles throughout his lifetime. We see throughout the Old Testament that Moses is a prophet, he's a priest, he's a lawgiver, he acts as judge for Israelites, for the Israelites. He is an intercessor praying on their behalf. He's a shepherd. He's a miracle worker. What else? And I mean, for all intents and purposes, he is the founder of a nation. In his 120 years, he spends the first 40 years in Egypt, the second 40 years as a fugitive in Midian, and then that last 40 years in the wilderness with the children of Israel. Unfortunately, he does not enter the promised land, even though he's the one that's called to deliver them, right? He does not enter the promised land. He allows his anger and frustration to kind of lead him to disobedience. And so at the end of his life, Joshua, son of Nun, is the one who replaces him. Right. So this is like all the information. Maybe it's not all the information, but this is a lot of information about the author. And here's what I want you to see as you get ready to get into Exodus is that Moses didn't write Exodus as like an outsider, right? He wasn't on the outside looking in. He lived this story. All right. He was both the deliverer and a man himself who needed to be delivered from fear, insecurity, and his own flesh, right? Does that resonate with you? Does that sound familiar? All right. This really matters when you're reading his words. Like you can see all the things. It's easy to see how God uses him and all the amazing things that he does. And when we're on the outside looking in, we can kind of look and think, oh, well, the Lord couldn't use me like that. But when you understand who the author is, that he was a man who struggled with fear, he was also a man who struggled with insecurity. He sometimes allowed his feelings to get in his own way. He was a man who needed to be delivered from his own flesh, right? And the Lord still used him. It helps us to see that even if we are struggling, we don't have to be perfect, that the Lord can use us too, right? So it's so important for us to look at the author. It gives us so much insight. All right. One of the things that helps us to study the Bible in context is knowing approximately when events happened and where they happened. This isn't just like, I don't know. This is not just scholarship or academic. This is not like trivia. It tells you, it gives you a clue. If you can get that information, it gives you a clue as to what was culturally happening, right? Who the surrounding nations were and what the stakes really were, what the political or cultural environment was. It helps you to understand what was going on in the lives of the people outside of the story that's being told, right? And so, with Exodus being written and covering a time so far back, there is some debate about when it was written, but and especially with there not being an internal date in Exodus, so like when you read through Exodus, it doesn't give you any insight as to when it was written, but it was likely written between 1265 and 1220 BC. This is between the time that Moses led Israel out of Egypt and his death, right? So I want you to think he was writing the book of Exodus in during his time in the wilderness, okay? So when was Exodus being written? It was being written in retrospect during his time in the wilderness after it had just happened, right? So just kind of keep that in mind, right? And so what are the key places that we see here? Well, we see Egypt. That is here in Exodus. And Egypt was once a place of provision and protection. I want you to think about Joseph, right? We just finished the story in Genesis. And so Egypt is the place where Joseph sent for his father and his father's household, right? Jacob and all of his sons and all of their children and all of their family, they went into Egypt. That was a place of provision and protection, right? For the famine. I don't know if you remember that. You can go back and read it in Genesis. And now, even though it was a place that God led them for provision and protection, it is now turned into a place of oppression, slave labor, and genocide, honestly, right? And then we also see Midian. Midian is a place of hiding and preparation. This is where Moses was formed before his calling. We also go to Mount Sinai, where God gives the law. It's the mountain of encounter. And we also see the wilderness, right? The in-between space. It's not Egypt, but also not the promised land. All right. And I want you to pay attention to that shift with Egypt. It started as a place of blessing. Like I said, Genesis ends with Joseph saving his whole family there. But by Exodus 1, a new king who didn't know nothing about Joseph and what he had done for the Egyptians, as a result of that, it turned into a place of bondage. And so where you once found provision, maybe on your job, maybe in a certain situation or in a city, can become a place of oppression. But the thing that I want you to pay attention to is that God didn't leave them there. Okay. Okay, then the next thing you want to look at is the next question is like, who was Exodus written for? Who was this book that I've read or that I'm preparing to read? Who was it written for? What do I know about those people? And that matters because it's going to help you to understand the point of view that was given. It also helps us to understand the things that were included and why some things weren't included, right? So depending on who I'm talking to, I don't have to explain everything. It reveals a relationship that I might have that the author has with the audience when you take into consideration who the audience is. And so in this case, the original intended audience of the writing of Exodus is the people of Israel, right? These are Hebrews. I want you to understand who they were, okay? The people that Moses has in mind that's going to read this text about this Exodus, they are Hebrews that were born in Egypt, more than likely, right? Who lived through harsh labor and the killing of their sons. These are people who also failed to trust God in spite of all the miracles they witnessed. And it's also for the people who will eventually inherit the promised land, right? The title Exodus means going out or departure, right? And so even though it's not the only theme, it is central to the story. Like this is their going out from Egypt. The purpose, you also want to consider the purpose. So who wrote it? Who was it written to? And for what? Why did they write it? Right? The purpose that Moses had was to record the events of Israel's deliverance, their exodus from Egypt. Purpose is so important. Purpose also gives us insight. When we understand the author, the audience, and the reason for the writing, it helps us to understand why things are left out. One of the things I hear or complaints against the Bible all the time is like, well, there are things that are missing, or it doesn't talk about this, or it doesn't talk about that. Okay, why are you judging the Bible against what you think it should have in it? Or why are you judging the Bible against a purpose that the Bible itself doesn't have? Allow the Bible to tell you what it was written for, allow the author to tell you what it was written for, allow the text to reveal to you the reason. And it wasn't so that we could have an exhaustive history of everything that has happened since creation. That ain't it, right? But when I don't understand the purpose, I can misjudge the Bible and what's included. And so when I look at the book of Exodus and I understand that the purpose is to record the events of Israel's deliverance, it's to record their exodus from Egypt. When I recognize that it stresses redemption and consecration, when I'm paying attention and I recognize it's the link between the origin of the people and God's promise to Abraham and the beginning of this theocratic kingdom under Moses, when I pay attention to those things, then I can accept what's included and not be upset about what's not included because those things weren't the purpose of this thing, right? Um, why does the audience matter? If you still haven't gotten it, it's because it's so important to think about the audience because I think it also helps us to realize that the Bible was actually written for a particular group of people, that each book was written to someone or for someone, and it wasn't us. It was written for our benefit, present day, right? The believer. It was written for our benefit, but it wasn't written to us. So we have to that's going to help us to pay attention to the message that was sent from the author to the original audience and then learn something from that? So why does the audience matter? Because Moses was writing to people who had seen God move and still struggled to trust him. He wasn't just writing this as a way to document what was being written, right? He wasn't writing theology for the classroom or so that we can like memorize it. It wasn't for that. He was writing testimony and instruction for people who were in transition. All right. People who had just come out of bondage, but they had been in bondage for so long, they were not fully walking in their freedom. That's who this was written for. Does that make sense to you? Like, can you relate to that? Even if you cannot relate to the circumstances, can you relate to being a woman who's coming out of something, but you're not fully walking in your freedom? Maybe you're coming out of imposter syndrome. Maybe you are coming out of toxic relationships and toxic behavior, but you're not fully walking in the freedom. Maybe you're new to salvation. Maybe you're new to the word of God and you're not fully walking in your freedom. Okay. Coming out of something, but not yet fully free. Can you relate to that? Exodus was written for exactly that person. Okay. Now, this is where I think maybe people can be with me, can stick with me when it comes to like the people that are involved, right? But you also, here's the geek part, but it's important. Here's the geek part, but it's important. You also need to look at the literary organization. This is a work of literature. It is a written work. And so grammar and literary devices and things like that were used, which means I need to take them into consideration. I need to be aware of them and know how they work. If not, I'm going to miss it. Okay. So what I'm talking about is how the book is organized, and the reason you're going to pay attention to how the book is organized is because the structure is going to help you to study, right? And so this is a Bible study skill that I want to give you right now before you even get into chapter 1, verse 1. All right. I want you to, of any book, it is not just Exodus, but this applies to any book. All right. You need to look at the whole thing first. Do you remember, like, I don't know, maybe in elementary school or middle school, and they were giving you all of these strategies for helping you to understand, or maybe it was even like SAT prep or end of the year exam prep, I don't know. And they're telling you, oh, before you start reading the paragraph or before you start reading the story, look at the table of contents, look at the major headlines, look at this and look at that before you go back to read. That skill, that strategy, those strategies, you need to pull those back if you have them, pull those back in when you get ready to read the Bible, okay? Because what you want to do is you want to read the map before you take the trip, right? You want to get an overview of where you're going. Now, I know that sounds foreign because we just put on the GPS and then we just go turn by turn. But I like to look at the full route, right? One, it's going to help me to see when I get lost, or it'll help prepare me for a delay. Like, I know we're going to take this highway. I know what time of day it is. Oh, I'm going to be sitting with my foot on the brake, right? It gives me some insight before I get started. When you do that with the books of the Bible, it's going to do the same thing, okay? Because understanding the structure of a book helps you to interpret each passage correctly, right? Because then you'll understand where it fits in the larger story. So when we talk about context, I'm not just talking about reading the verse that you have in context of the chapter that it came from. I mean, reading the verse that you have in context of the chapter it came from, the book that it's located in, and where this situation is positioned in the full redemptive story, right? In the full redemptive story. And so you're going to look at all of that. You're going to pull back and get a big picture before you get into the reading. The book of Exodus is into, like, you can be divided into two major sections. That first section, it's not the first half, but it's roughly the first half. Chapters 1 through 18 is all about the redemption of God's people from Egypt, right? So how the situation they're in, chapters 1 through 18 is going to cover the situation they're in, how the Lord redeems his people from Egypt back to himself. That's going to be chapters 1 through 18. Then the remaining chapters, chapters 19 through 40, is really going to focus on the revelation to God's people at Sinai. And it is the revelation of God to his people at Sinai. That is the second part of it. Right. And then there's a chapter breakdown, right? Each chapter, or maybe not say each chapter, but there are lots of things that happen. When you get an overview of the stops or the turns that you're going to take, it really helps to prepare you. So, what do we see? It starts out with slavery in Egypt, and then God chooses Moses. Then we move on to God sending Moses to Pharaoh, and then all the plagues and the Passover, the actual exodus that happens of the children of Israel from Egypt, right? Then we see the crossing of the Red Sea, the complaining in the wilderness. God giving them the law, God giving them the instructions to build a tabernacle. We see them shortly after being delivered, breaking the law, right? With the golden calf. We then see them building the tabernacle, and it ends with the glory of the Lord being there with them, right? And when you look at it from this bird's eye view, when you do this overview, when you look at it this way, you're able to notice the arc of the whole book, right? And if you do that, you can see that it moves from slavery, right, through salvation at the Red Sea to worship, the tabernacle. It moves from serving Pharaoh to serving Yahweh. And let me just say, in case you don't know that, this is the movement of every redeemed life. Okay? Every life that is redeemed is a life that has gone from serving the thing which kept them in bondage, i.e., Pharaoh, in this example, to salvation that only God can do. It's by the grace and the power of God that we are redeemed to him. And the response to that is worship. That's the movement. Slavery, salvation, worship. And we see that in the book of Exodus. All right. These are some things that you'll notice, like just some major themes. And I'm not a huge fan of like literature outside of the Bible. Honestly, I don't read a lot of books where I'm like, "Ooh, what's the theme?" I don't read a lot. I mean, classical books, maybe there are a couple that I love, but it's not really my thing. But it's important. That's my point here. It's important to pay attention to the major themes in the book that you're reading. All right. Because if you understand what the themes are, you can look for them as you're reading. So there are themes of redemption, obviously consecration. There's a theme of a theology of creation. Let's stop there. What is a theology of creation, girl? Um, it is what we believe about creation as believers. And that theology of creation is echoed in Exodus because God created all the things, right? So it affirms God as the creator. What else? It also is going to have the knowledge of God, the portrayal of God. Another theme is going to be oppression, right? So slavery and liberation, deliverance. So you're going to see covenant, you're going to see law. There's some things you want to pay special attention to, though, as you study the book of Exodus, and it's the name of God, right? That the name of God, Yahweh, is revealed at the burning bush. You want to pay special attention to that. It may be something that you might want to do a word study on. You definitely want to look at the commentary when it comes to that. Also, the plagues, want to pay special attention to the plagues. They have such deep meaning, and it's such a clapback the way the Lord does the plagues. I absolutely love it. And then the hardening of Pharaoh's heart. That is a point of great contention, right? That's a conversation that so many people struggle with. That's a topic that people struggle with because it's like, okay, what choice did Pharaoh have? If it says that God hardened his heart, is it fair? Is God a fair God? And so that's something else you're going to want to pay special attention to. All right. Here's the thing. When you know the major themes of a book before you start reading, it takes you beyond just like the reading. You start to look for something. You become an active reader. Your reading becomes more effective. You are not just a passive reader, just like reading the story. This is how you go from reading, right, the Bible to studying it. Okay. I'm going to go back to one more thing. I'm going to say, I got to say it again. I know I said it before, but it's such a huge deal. And you see it all throughout scripture. And you see it first in the book of Exodus. The name of God, right? In Exodus chapter 3, God reveals his name, Yahweh, I am who I am. This is not just like a small thing for you to look at and be like, oh, it's not trivia. Oh, I know that he does this in chapter 3 of Exodus. Mm-mm-mm-mm. It is the foundation of the entire book of Exodus. All right. And it's referenced a million times, maybe not a million, but it's referenced a million times in the New Testament. Everything that God does in Exodus is an expression of who he is. He is acting according to his name. So you can see those characteristics, those attributes of God being I am who I am played out on full display in the book of Exodus, but you have to know that it's there to be looking for it. That's why understanding the literary organization of the book is going to be helpful for you when it comes to studying. Last but certainly not least is genre, right? Listen, genre is going to impact how you approach it, right? And in the book of Exodus, there are actually several genres, mostly narrative, but there is some poetry there, laws, and instructions. And the way that those genres are woven together is important for the interpretation of the different genres. Here's the thing. Why do you care? And is this just like nerd stuff that you don't need to know? No, you need to know it. And here's why. Exodus is one, not just one genre, it's several. And this matters because you do not read poetry the same way you read law. Think about that. You expect for poetry to be what? More emotional. It's probably going to be more colorful. It's going to be less literal, right? And you don't read narrative the same way you read instructions for building something, right? Instructions is like it's telling me to do something. Narrative is just telling me about something, right? And so when you know what genre you're reading, you know the questions to ask. and you should be asking the text questions. If the genre is narrative, you can be asking the question, what is happening and why, right? When the genre is law, the question you can ask is, what is God requiring and what does it reveal about his character? When you're reading poetry, the question you can ask is, what is being felt and expressed, right? The genre can then become your interpretive lens. Okay. So, so look, I need you to hear me right now, okay? Like this is the end. I'm done. But I need you to hear me right now. You just did something, okay? You didn't just listen to a podcast episode. You sat down, you showed up, and you equipped yourself. You are now equipped. You can go back through this, watch it again, take notes. Strongly recommend that you watch this again and you take notes so that you are like in an actual journal and notebook, right? So you're ready when we start next week with like actually studying the book of Exodus. All right. You sat down, you showed up. And so now you're equipped, right? You're equipped to study one of the most powerful books in your entire Bible. All right. You know who wrote it. Come on. You know, you could teach somebody something today. Okay. You know who wrote it. You know why it was written. You now have a better understanding of the structure, the themes, the genre, and the arc of the whole story, right? So now you're not just going into Exodus blind. You're also not going into it with just like, you're also not just going into it with like the tradition and whatever it is you've been taught, like with the movie The Prince of Egypt. You're not going into it with that anymore either. You are going into it actually prepared. And that ain't nothing. That ain't not nothing. This is not nothing. Can I say that? It's everything. That's really what I'm trying to say. That is everything. Because truth be told, most people are going to open their Bible to Exodus and feel lost by chapter 2 or don't understand why the Lord is doing these things to these people, not understand what's happening, and can misunderstand like the character of God. That has a huge impact on our relationship with Him, right? But that's not going to be, not today. Why? Because you have context. Y'all know I love context, because you have context, because you have a framework, and now you ain't got no excuse not to open it. So you can already start reading Exodus before next week. You already know that's where we're going. Okay. So go ahead and start reading it in different translations, read it in the translation that is easiest for you to understand. Get into it. All right. So here's what's happening next week. Next week, we're going to be opening Exodus together. I don't know if I'm going to do it chapter by chapter or like section by section, probably section by section. I previously thought about doing it chapter by chapter, actually talked it out, but I think I'm going to go section by section. That's the teacher in me. I want us to get the full understanding of the story. And we're going to do that right here on this podcast. And you know what? I don't want you to miss a single episode. The best way to make sure that you don't miss an episode, you know what you could do? You can come and join the She Knows the Word community right now. Guess what? And it's free. I know that I have the She Knows the Word collective, and then I started this group, She Knows the Word podcast. Like, I've just decided we should all be together in the same group. So if you're in the collective, you're in the group. If you're not in the collective, you're in the group. Now, the collective, they get training and all of that, but we should be in the group. Why? Because we all talking about Bible, and there is something exciting about being in a group of women that talk about Bible. We should not be separated. We should be together. And so now I have just this one free group. Okay, it is completely free. Come join. Listen, these your people. Okay, you're looking for your people. These is your people. These are women who are serious about the word. They are serious about their growth, and they're serious about showing up every single week to study together. So come and be a part of that. The link is in the show notes. It takes like less than a minute to join. Answer the 3 little questions. Just don't let the momentum stop here. You started something today. Let's finish it. Get in the group. All right. And then I'll see you next week in Exodus. I'm so excited about that. All right. Let's go. See y'all next time. Later.